yelled at people to call the ambulance. I said, screaming his name, "Don't leave us, don't leave us." Foamy blood was pouring from his mouth. It was one of the most gruesome things as I sat there trying to stop the blood, but he kept bleeding and he died right there in front of me. The ambulance came and pushed me away, opened his chest, and I saw the number of bullet holes in him, and I tell you, it was over. I was broken, I was done. I went back to my apartment and tried to scrub the blood of this boy off my hands, but I felt my heart fill up with anger and blackness. All I could think is, what kind of world do we live in? Where everybody I know knows who JonBenet Ramsey is or Natalie Holloway, but few people I know can name the name of one black child killed in my city today. What is going on with this world? That we seem to value life so little that dozens of kids, of boys, of men are murdered every week. I wanted to give up. I was done. And then I left my apartment and walked out to the courtyard, and I saw the back of Miss Jones' head. She turned around and she saw my expression. She said, "Come give me a hug." And I hugged this woman and I wept in her arms. She held me and all she said is, "Stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful." I'm telling you right now, courage does not always roar. It's not when you stand up and beat your chest and you're ready for the big game, the big fight, the big speech. That is not real courage in my book anymore. It's not running into a burning building. Real courage is that when life has beaten you down so low, when you are broken, when you have wounds that you wonder if they can ever heal. Courage is when you've done something wrong and you feel the weight of shame on your chest so heavy that you can barely breathe. Courage is when you're curled up on a ball in your bed, sleepless throughout the night, and when the sun comes up, courage isn't the roar. Courage is that small voice in your mind that says, "Get up, get out of bed, put your feet on the floor, brush your teeth, wash your face, comb your hair, God, if you have it. Put your hand on that doorknob and go outside for another day of loving and stand with all of your might and look up into the heavens. And courage has you say in a defiant spirit, you can take everything from me. You could cut me deep. You could render me in shame, but you will never, ever stop me from loving those who mock me, from loving those who hate me, from loving those who don't forgive me, from loving the cynics, from loving the darkness so much that I myself, through my small acts of consistent, unyielding love, will bring on the light. And this brings me to the final point of conspirators that my dad and my community have shown me, is that conspirators are the ones that show up. They just show up. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we go through life all the time, but we don't always show up. We may be there in body, but we're not there in spirit. And we begin to erode the truth of who we are. We fail to live our authenticity. A great President Lincoln said that everyone is born an original, but sadly, most die copies because they don't show up. I've learned that what you think about the world says less about the world than it does about you. And when you show up in this world and have the courage to tell your truth in moments big, but more importantly, in moments small, then you are the architect not only of your own destiny, but you're the architect of transformational change. Showing up. Forgive me, I've got just a bad story about that, but I was on my way to Stanford as a freshman, coming back to the farm. And here I got on a plane and it was packed with people, but somehow God shined his grace upon me, because as they closed the door to the plane, there was 2 seats open next to me, and I thought to myself, look at all these other people. It's such a shame that they have to deal with all that cramped space, but I have this whole seat. God obviously loves me more than them. Well, just as I was sitting there so satisfied, the door to the plane opens and all of us shot to attention because it sounded like some beast was coming in. Some screams were happening. We couldn't understand what was going on outside of the plane. And then we understood because the beast came onto the plane and it had 3 heads. It was a woman and a little boy and a baby. Immediately, everybody on that plane looked at them and then slowly turned their heads to me. And I could see everyone was thinking, you smug little man. And that woman and her 2 children came to stand before me and said, I'm sitting there. And I said, are you sure? And they moved in and they sat down, and immediately, as a 19-year-old man, I suddenly had an evolved thought that I could accept this now as being the worst flight of my life, or I can make it different. Because in life you get one choice over and over again. That is to accept conditions as they are, or to take responsibility for changing them. To yield to the circumstances around you, or to show up and do something about them. I decided that I was gonna make this the best flight of my life. I started telling this little boy jokes, and he started laughing at my horrible jokes. Like my grandfather would love. Like, why did Tigger and Eeyore have their heads in the toilet? Because they were looking for poo. Like, why? What do you call your mother's sister who runs away and gets married? An antelope. I'm sorry, I had to try. By the time we landed, we were all having a ball. The woman who came on the plane, embarrassed, suddenly felt like she was lifted. We exchanged addresses as I was getting ready to come down here to the farm, and we never kept in touch, but 5 years passed, 10 years passed, 15 years passed, and I was running for mayor of Newark. On my most discouraged day in that campaign, I got a letter from this woman saying, you don't remember me, but I met you on a flight to Stanford 15 years ago, and I will never forget your kindness then. She said to me, not only do I remember your kindness, but we're actually here in Newark. We own a factory here. Her son became a great volunteer on my campaign. They got me involved with their company, and she ended up being something that all politicians love, a campaign contributor. Show up. And now the second man, my grandfather, who was with my father in spirit. It's one simple thing that he would say to me at graduations. He would say to me, boy, understand that you have a role in this world, and that's to get along with others, to join your spirit with them. I tell you, this is one that I struggle with. You see, conspirators need to embody those things I mentioned before, but they also need to join together. My grandfather, this amazing man, his life was all about the joining together of disparate elements of our society. He was born also to a single mother, but he was born in a difficult circumstance because he was born with red hair and much lighter skin than his siblings. It was obvious that he was born to a white man at a time that it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry. He grew up feeling that he had inside of his spirit so many different parts of his country. He ended up becoming a person that did everything he could to unite people. He was a union organizer, bringing people together for justice. He was a Democratic activist working within the party to support FDR. He was an entrepreneur, bringing people together for business endeavor. And he wanted his children and then his grandchildren to understand that what makes this country great is how united it is. He used to load us onto an RV and drive us around the country to show us how great this nation is. He would tell us history of our country, even if he didn't know it. We would ask him questions when we were driving through Arizona. Granddad, why do they call this town Yuma, Arizona? And he would say, well, let me see. That's because when this town was founding, there was a gunfight, and one guy shot the other, and he grabbed his heart and said, Yuma, and then died. I talked to my grandfather all the time about this country. He tells me that, son, this country we forget. We talk always about the Declaration of Independence, but really, this nation was founded on a declaration of interdependence. This recognition that we need each other. When I talk to my grandfather now, I anguish to him that we are a nation that has become so polarized, where people are so quick to identify themselves as Democrat or Republican before they say, first and foremost, that I am an American. They're so focused on left and right that they forget that this nation